Breaking news. Developments in the Austin serial bombings. Outnumbered overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. The city hall has been closed in nearby Pflugerville as police have begun evacuating the area around the home of the Austin bombing suspect. Federal authorities are preparing to deploy an anti-explosives robot. Austin police say the suspect, identified as 23-year-old Mark Anthony Condit, blew himself up using an explosive device as a SWAT team closed in on his vehicle. Authorities are warning people to remain vigilant in case he left behind more package bombs. Texas Governor Greg Abbott here.
We don't know if there are any other bombs out there, and if so, how many and where they may be, because this individual may have, either by mail or by placement or whatever the case may be, have put other bombs out there. So everyone needs to be remaining vigilant to make sure that they don't pick up a package that could blow up.
Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt has more from Austin, where police are digging through the evidence and into the suspect's past.
Harris, an extraordinary effort by federal and local law enforcement officials working together brought Austin's nightmare to an end overnight, but the situation and the investigation still unfolding. Right now in Pflugerville, where Mark Anthony Condit, the bomber, lived, there is a heavy police presence, and right now the area around the home that we are told he shared with at least 2 roommates is being evacuated. Logic would seem to suggest that that means that investigators are concerned about potentially unexploded devices being somewhere in or around that home. So they've evacuated that area after swooping down onto the home in the early hours of this morning. Now, as for how Mark Anthony Condit was finally caught and killed himself, his fatal mistake, it seems to have been, was to go to a FedEx store in the Sunset Valley suburb of Austin. There he was caught on one of a dozen or so surveillance cameras within the store. You can see in these pictures he was wearing a wig, he was wearing gloves, but still investigators were able to get a positive ID. Once they had that, they knew the vehicle he was using, they knew his cell phone number, and then those 2 things came together right where I'm standing in Red Rock, north of downtown Austin last night. They triangulated the cell phone when he switched it on. They traced his vehicle to the parking lot of this Red Roof Inn. They moved in, they found that Condit was actually sitting in the vehicle. Then he began to drive away. A SWAT team then moved in, boxed Condit's vehicle in, and as officers approached the vehicle, Condit apparently detonated some sort of explosive device. That is what killed him. But while investigators have their man, they say they still have a lot of work to do here. Listen.
It's a long day ahead. We are concerned that there may be other packages that are still out there. We need the public to remain vigilant, especially today as we go through this investigation. We will be here as long as it takes with our partners to figure out exactly what happened, why it happened, and how it happened.
Now, the why it happened is still obviously a mystery. We do not know the motive of Mark Anthony Condit. We do know that in 2012, someone writing a blog calling himself Mark Condit wrote comments which were against gay marriage and against abortion. We do not know at this point, Harris, whether that plays into this investigation in any way. But investigators will ultimately give us the answer that everybody in Austin wants to hear. Harris?
Well, and we're hearing from some local not local representatives, but those who are in Congress who are from there, like Representative Mike McCall, who says that many of the bomb-making materials may have been purchased by this bomber at a local Home Depot. So some of those details are coming out as we report. Jonathan Hunt, thank you very much. Earlier today on Fox News, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick emphasized the dangerous and life-saving work police officers across our nation carry out every day, particularly in instances like the one that put people in the Austin area on edge. Watch.
Any police officer always puts himself in harm's way investigating or being involved in a criminal activity. But when you're taking on a bomber, when these SWAT officers surrounded him between 2 and 3 o'clock this morning, he could have thrown a pipe bomb at them. He could have had the hotel area or his car booby-trapped. They went in to get him, put their lives on the line, and thank goodness they were not hurt. So incredible detective work.
Opportunity now to talk to somebody who's been part of all this. Sheriff Robert Chody, the Williamson County, Texas Sheriff. Your department is sharing its task force and resources. The last 12 hours have been very interesting. Tell me about the apprehension, the move-in first before this guy blew himself up.
But let me be clear, our role as the Sheriff's Department is very limited. Obviously, this was the primary goal for the Austin Police Department, though it ended up in Williamson County. I've received a call around 2 o'clock this morning from a couple members that were on the task force of the FBI task force, as well as a couple of our organized crime unit who are partaking in some of the investigation, and some of our SWAT team who helped in the aftermath of this. But other than that, in the investigation portion, we're very limited. But when I got on scene around 2 o'clock this morning, that's when I spoke briefly with Chief Manley, and the bomber was already deceased, and the evidence collection started, and things of that nature.
Sheriff Chody, the important work now, since that 2 a.m. call that you got, is to protect everybody from what may have been left behind. Talk to me about the work that's being done. I know that there is at least one robot involved.
Well, that's exactly the message we want to give to our community, and we'll re-echo Chief Manley's comments. Is if you see a suspicious package and you're in the Austin area specifically, continue doing the protocol we've been doing for the past two weeks or so, and that's call 911. Let the pros take care of these calls for service. Over the past 2 weeks, our calls for service here in Williams County have increased a great deal. We had over 35 calls for suspicious packages just yesterday, and for Williamson County, that's a lot. Austin had a tremendous amount more, but we were asking the public to continue that and until we feel confident enough to say it's all clear. But right now, we're not confident to say that.
You know, the last time that I personally have covered something that involved one of these anti-explosive robots was the Garland, Texas. So also in your state, but not in your city, outside that cartoon contest. And so I've seen how they work. Tell me about the evacuation process first, though, because don't you have to get people out of the way before you even deploy that?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, but typically the protocol is to try to evacuate people out of the way before you get the robot out, because your concern is that before you touch a package or get near the package that you interrupt something that causes the device to go off and then potentially injure people. So that's the initial approach.
You know, I'm curious to know now what happens next in terms of the evidence collection. And you mentioned a little bit about it, but your task force is part of that, as I understand it.
Well, our task force was part of with the FBI in the investigation part. I think they're not part of the evidence collection. They brought in, ATF has brought in some teams to do that. Our people are now off the scene, and so I wouldn't feel comfortable commenting on that. I would like to say, while I have an opportunity, Chief Manley, the Austin Police Department, and all the federal partners involved, from the FBI, ATF, the U.S. Marshals, the Texas Rangers, they've done a tremendous job for Central Texas. I'm very proud of them and proud to just be associated with law enforcement today, and kudos to them for what they did. Explosives, bombs are a very difficult investigation to do, and they did this. I know it seems like a long time because we're in fear as a community, but they demonstrated what Central Texas law enforcement is all about, and I'm very proud to be part of that.
Yeah, 19 days, and at one point reports of 350 people on the ground in those different agencies that you just enumerated there. Before I let you go, when did authorities realize that this was over? I know you got a 2 a.m. call, but what can you tell us about what happened in those wee hours of the morning?
Well, understand that, and my understanding is that around midnight is when a call came into another chief, but it developed rather quickly. So I would say midnight was the time frame that when we understood that the suspect was in this area. Even though I didn't get the call till 2, midnight was probably the time, but it developed real quickly. And then when the suspect went on the move, that made the situation escalate quicker.
So authorities are outside the suspected bomber's home in Pflugerville right now, evacuating, about to move in that anti-explosives robot, as you and I have been talking about. How long will this process go on? How long will people have to stay out of their homes?
Well, I'm not privy to that information. That's in a different county. It's right it borders Williamson County, and I don't know when they started, but I'd imagine, considering the circumstances for the past 17 days, as you stated, that it would take quite a while. I mean, they're going to go over every inch and quarter of that house and around that house, the yards, and rightfully so.
Well, Sheriff Chody, we appreciate you being with us. You got that 2 a.m. call. Some of your task members were there on hand as they took out the bombing suspect. The story not over. They are making sure that whatever he left behind doesn't kill anybody else. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Fox News Alert now. FBI Director Christopher Wray is making headlines this hour. In a rare television interview, a sit-down with NBC News, Christopher Wray denying the White House tried to influence his decision-making about the FBI's top agent. Watch.
Do you feel any political pressure from the White House?
No.
President's never asked you to say anything about it or clear him?
About the Russia investigation?
Yes.
He's never asked me to do anything with the Russia investigation.
Interview comes on the heels of Attorney General Jeff Sessions' decision to fire FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Wray is suggesting the move was not politically motivated.
I will tell you that my commitment to making sure that our process is followed, that it relies on objective input, and that most importantly, it is not based on political or partisan influence is something I am utterly unyielding on.
We do understand the FBI chief refused to comment on reports that he had threatened to quit if urged to fire officials at the Bureau. Let's bring in Republican Congressman Andy Biggs, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Great to see you today. Glad you're here for this breaking development. So how important is this interview and what we're learning? It seems to back up exactly what President Trump has been saying.
Yeah, no, I think it does back up and says what President Trump really wants to get to. He wants to get this thing over and done with. He feels exonerated. I think he also feels frustrated. There's been no indication of collusion, and the Mueller investigation is kind of wandering all over now, way beyond the scopes of whether there was collusion in the 2016 presidential election. So I think President Trump is exactly right, and I think Christopher Wray basically said, look, President Trump hasn't put any pressure on me, and I think that's right. Everything that I was hearing beforehand was that was the case.
Christopher Wray has that job because of President Trump. And so for him to say that the president hasn't spoken with him or put pressure on regarding Russia, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that President Trump is giving him wide berth and the freedom and independence that he needs as the director of the FBI, with particularly the investigation that Mueller is conducting. The real issue is why isn't Rod Rosenstein, who is the number 2 guy at DOJ, why isn't he putting some constraints on that? Why isn't he putting some constraints on that investigation? This thing is way beyond the boundary and it's gotten way long.
Why isn't he? Do you know?
Well, the way I read it is that Rod Rosenstein helped bring Mr. Mueller on, and that his management style is to take a hands-off approach. Well, this is his buddy. He's got given him lots of room, and I think that's a real problem myself.
Hands-off, but hands-on taxpayer money and time to watch this.
Exactly right. And so it continues to go on and on and on. And quite frankly, a special counsel is going to go as long as you let them go, because they want to come back somewhere along the way and say, look, this is the work product we've done.
So, Congressman Biggs, though, isn't that a little tricky? Because if you step in on Robert Mueller at this point and you thwart this investigation, and I don't know if an attacking tweet does that, I want to get your opinion on that too, but if you do, that doesn't stop the investigation, or does it?
Well, a tweet doesn't do anything other than express what I think is frustration, and quite frankly...
but it has no chilling effect in your understanding.
It has no chilling effect.
And if you fired Robert Mueller, would the investigation go away?
Not necessarily, but so we've actually discussed legislation here in the House that I think is appropriate, and that is put some boundaries on this investigation, put a timeline in there, let's get a report done, and let's get it over with and move on. Because, in my opinion, President Trump has been exonerated from everybody by like Comey, like Clapper, the House Intelligence Committee. Okay, so there's no collusion there. There's no point for this investigation. So let's find a way to pull the plug, and maybe the Congress needs to do that.
That's fascinating, because there are two things going on, and I want to know from you, are there two factions on Capitol Hill, and are some of them Republicans? So what you're saying is put some boundaries on where Mueller's going. and particularly what he can spend and where he can go and all that. But then you have people who want to put some boundaries on whether or not the president can fire Robert Mueller and to save his job.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, I actually heard somebody from the other party on the floor today say that we need to pass a bill that Robert Mueller can't be fired. And so it's really indicative of the division within the country in some respects. But it also gets to the heart of this, Harris, and that is originally people were calling for President Trump to be impeached before he ever even got sworn in. And that kind of, this whole delegitimization thing is what I think is driving what's going on now. And it's not producing anything positive in the investigation. It's not producing anything positive for the country either.
Last question for you, Representative. Robert Mueller enjoys bipartisan support for the most part. Do you support him? And, you know, considering some boundaries that you'd like to put on the investigation, do you support him staying and finishing the job?
No, I've been calling for his recusal since last June. The very fact that the team that he put together is so biased and has so many conflicts indicates to me that this investigation indicated to me back then that this investigation would not be an objective investigation. I'd suggest that that's the case today. I don't think his product has been scintillating in any way, and I think that we'd all be better served if he was gone.
Would you replace him?
I would not necessarily replace him. I think that his work is done. I think we need a second special counsel now to go back and investigate the corruption that we've discovered, that the Inspector General has discovered over time as well.
Congressman Andy Biggs of the great state of Arizona. Wish we had your sunshine today, sir.
Oh, me too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are scrambling to pass a government funding bill. They have to do this by a Friday deadline. Deja vu all over again. Can they make it happen before the government shuts down? A top GOP congresswoman joins me after the commercial break. Stay close. And the Senate Intelligence Committee is holding a hearing on how to fight Russian meddling in our elections. Are we doing enough to keep that at bay? The latest on that next.
In a democracy, citizens must have faith that their vote counts and is counted correctly. The threat of interference remains, and we recognize that the 2018 midterm and future elections are clearly potential targets for Russian hacking attempts.
Congressional leaders appear to be closing in on a massive spending bill. Remember, here on Overtime, we've been talking about all the money to fund the government and avoid a government shutdown by day after tomorrow. We're hearing it could be posted now, that bill, at any moment. Online, it'll pop up and includes legislation to improve background checks. We're just learning this for firearm purchases. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill. Mike, this is coming together.
Well, absolutely, Harris. A $1.3 trillion package to fund the federal government through the end of September. We expect it to post online any moment now, where lawmakers will get a chance to see some of the fine print. The top four congressional leaders, McConnell, Schumer, Ryan, and Pelosi, met a short time ago and all sounded upbeat after their discussion. Speaker Paul Ryan told reporters they're in a good place and, quote, we're finalizing and we expect to post something very soon. Congress faces a late night Friday night deadline and could not afford a government shutdown due to a snowstorm. The hope has been they would introduce a bill and the House would vote tomorrow and then kick it over to the Senate. Moments ago, the Senate Majority Leader hinted they're almost there.
I'm pleased to report that the appropriations package is currently being finalized. I'll have more to say once the bill has been filed, but I'm proud to announce it will meet a number of vitally important objectives.
House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi told reporters a short time ago, quote, well, we do have a few language points that we need to clear up, but we have made good progress. I think we're going to present to our members something they can comfortably support. And other members of the Democratic leadership team say lawmakers must get this done.
It appears to be as though things seem to be moving forward. So we hope there is no shutdown. We don't believe that's the way we should be governing. We certainly hope we don't go back to CRs. That's also not a good way to govern. We've continually said that. And we'll wait and see what happens.
Sources say there's more than $2 billion in new money for school safety, $1.57 billion for the border wall, and we also understand there's a measure included that would tighten up background checks for those seeking to
to buy firearms. Harris?
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. Let's talk about somebody who knows the money of all of this. Tennessee Congresswoman Diane Black on the House Ways and Means and Budget Committees. Great to see you today. What does this compromise mean for each side, Democrats and Republicans?
Well, Harris, I'm waiting to see exactly what the bill says. Until I know the details of it, I don't know that I can completely comment, but at least for what's coming out, I will tell you that I don't believe this is the way we should be doing business here. We passed 12 appropriations bills over here in the House more than 6 months ago. Now we have a bill that's coming out of the Senate where 4 people have negotiated it. It is not the way we should be doing things, and I'm very concerned about the amount of additional spending that's going to be in that bill. As you know, I am a fiscal conservative. I'm a budget chair. My budget cut rather than add. And now we've got senators just making their decision like they are a menu at a restaurant. I want this, I don't want that, which is 4 people doing the negotiation.
Yeah, when I go to the restaurant, though, I don't get to spend anybody else's money.
That's right.
So $1.3 trillion. And we understand some of the things that are in this are like military spending, 2.4% increase. I had on Representative Jim Jordan yesterday, the House Freedom Caucus, and I asked him, and I'll ask you the same question. This is not making government smaller. $1.3 trillion through September.
That's right. It is not making government smaller. And we all came up here with that promise. And that's the thing that disappoints me, is we don't use regular order. We passed a budget here in this House. We passed appropriation bills. It is the Senate that cannot get their act together. And then we come to this place where we do this huge spending bill. House members and the Senate members, but just a small group of people. I understand negotiations need to be done at the last minute, but this is much, much larger than what we passed out of the House. And it's very disappointing that year after year, instead of following the process that was set up a number of years ago that should be working to keep us constrained on what we spend, it's just so out of control. And so we're doing this year after year, and it's just is not the right way to govern.
Well, and year after year, but also month after month. I mean, let's put a fine point on this. This is the third go-around to keep the government open. I mean, can you get anything done without the threat of a shutdown? The American people are looking at this and they're thinking, is this agreement only driven because nobody wants the optics of that?
Well, I've been up here for 8 years, and this is the way we do it. We wait until we get right on the cliff, and we're going to fall off, and then we allow so few people to negotiate, and it makes it almost as if we, the everyday member of the House, is not a part of that. But I can tell you the senators have a whole lot more voice in this because it is a must-pass piece of legislation. Yeah. And so that's what happens.
Let's talk a little bit about DACA, and that forces us to talk again about the senators, because the deal that Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell cut, we understood, was that they would revisit this issue. There were dates certain where they had to talk about it. And then as it all shakes out, as late as this weekend, Democrats reportedly were walking away from the table. But now you see some things in there. You don't see DACA, but you see the border wall. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we have to do this. We have to do the DACA. We have been talking about it for months and months and months. We know what we need to have done. We've got to secure the border. We've got to stop the chain migration. And we have to stop the visa lottery program. And then we can also talk about those that came to this country because their parents brought them illegally, not through the fault of their own. And if we could just sit down at the table, sometimes I think if you would just allow the everyday member rather than just our leadership, we would have a better product at the end of the day.
Who did that? President Trump. We carried those roundtables live.
That's right. That's right.
I want to point this out, too, because I'm curious where the gun legislation is now. So there are provisions in this. Want to point out that the concealed carry reciprocity across state lines didn't make it. And there's other gun legislation in this. You've got the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. That did make it into, the reformation of that did make it into the language. And I know we're all waiting to see it fully, but based on that reporting, what's your comment?
Well, I can tell you that we do have to address the issue of the violence that is occurring with guns, but that comes to mental illness. And I think, once again, we're not going back to the root cause, because in every one of these situations, and we'll probably see that will come out of what was happening in Austin, Texas, is that you have somebody who's mentally ill, and I will almost bet you that there will be people around this gentleman once this comes out that says, we knew there was something wrong. We knew that he was going to cause harm. And when we see that, we can once again just trip over that and say, well, maybe now we have to take something else away, but it is mental illness, and until we decide how we handle that, we can talk about guns all day long. But here's a young man who was doing it with bombs. The Boston bomber used a pressure cooker. Are we going to not sell pressure cookers at the stores these days? So we've got to go back to root cause. I'm a nurse. I know about root cause. It's what I was taught 45 years ago in nursing school, and that's what we should be doing here.
Interesting. Congresswoman Diane Black, I understand this is going to hit your email box sometime in the next few minutes. The huge $1.3 trillion spending bill.
Yes.
We appreciate your time. Do you think we avoid a shutdown before I let you go?
I think that we do avoid a shutdown. I don't think that it's a very happy day for the American people or the future of our country where we continue to spend exorbitant amounts rather than looking at how we can be in control of our spending.
I wrote down what you said. 4 people negotiated this. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
2 top GOP House lawmakers are now joining the ranks of Republicans who say a second special counsel is needed to investigate alleged bias at the FBI. Whether that development is enough to bring action. Chris Steyerwalt, the Steyer is on fire, is here to talk with me about that. And President Trump facing major backlash from critics over his decision to congratulate Russian President Vladimir Putin on his re-election. But some of his key allies did the same thing. Is he being treated unfairly, the president? The Power Panel to weigh in. Stay close.